It's time. I think we can get started. So thanks everyone for joining the segmentation session here. It's not really a micro versus macro conversation, more holistic segmentation conversation. So I appreciate everyone that joined. We have a few other presenters on the line, so I'll let them introduce themselves. But my name is Francis Shin. I'm one of the solution architects here at EVOTEK. I've been traditionally a little more focused on the networking side. Funny enough, similar to Sumi. But I have my CCIE and route switch, and I'm kind of expanded my horizons outside of just networking to include some other aspects, including security as well. And then I'll let Sean go next, and then Sumi and Chris. So go ahead, Sean.
Perfect. Thank you, Francis. So Sean Neal, Senior Director Engineering Services for EVOTEK. So I'm helping lead the charge on our delivery services side, and spent a lot of time in this space, specifically networking, security, mobility, sort of that realm. And so network segmentation is a lot of what we do. So looking forward to the conversation.
Hey all, this is Sumita Gorla from Houston, Texas. I'm a systems engineering director for Illumio. I've been with Illumio for 7 years, the security lateral movement protection space, or zero trust if you call it. I've been in the networking, storage, cloud, data center industry for a long time. Looking forward to the conversation.
Hello, everybody. Chris Clarkson. I'm based out of the UK on the south coast in a place called Hove in Sussex, if you're familiar with that part of the world. I'm the partner engineering global director. My background is in networks as well. I started my career post-education as a support and systems engineer in the NOC and SOC space. I then moved into a consulting role, and I've spent many times in many data centers over the years configuring and fixing networks. And then I moved into the identity security space, so very much adjacent to the zero trust space that we're going to be talking to today. And now I found a home at Illumio for the last couple of years, and we're going to be discussing segmentation today. So thanks all for joining.
Great, thanks everyone. I definitely want to utilize the chat space whenever it makes sense to make this as a little more interactive as possible, rather than just a PowerPoint deck and a presentation. The good news is there's only 4 slides in this deck, so definitely want to make this more of a conversation than just us speaking to you. So as we see it, there's generally about 3 real types of segmentation, right? Traditional is kind of what everyone's been doing for 20 years now, right? Switching some VLANs, doing a layer 3 termination via an SVI in the firewalls, and then putting all the rules and policies on the firewalls, right? More or less everyone is still doing that to some degree, more or less, but that's kind of the beginning of segmentation, right? VLANs and firewalls. I would say some of the pros of that is that it's easy to control what's traversing your network. But there are obviously some limitations. One of the big limitations, I think, using this methodology is that you have to funnel everything through firewalls. And firewalls as a device are fairly expensive. So the more throughput you put through a firewall, you're going to need to get beefier firewalls, and that's an added cost, obviously. The other big limitation is within a VLAN or a subnet, a firewall is really not going to do much, right? Generally, that's going to be switched before it hits a firewall. So everything within a VLAN or a subnet can generally talk to each other, right? So if you want to provide additional segmentation just outside of subnets and VLANs, this is probably not going to do that, right? So you lose some of the granular control, but you are able to apply a certain amount of policies on your network, right? Macro segmentation, I think, has, well, as I define it, has risen the past 5 to 10 years, right? So it gives you some additional capabilities. So there's a general definition of what macro segmentation is, right? So outside of just firewalls, the network is able to provide an additional degree of segmentation, conceivably based on user identity, right? So you could define NAC as a type of macro segmentation or some sort of application types, right? So some application-centric models, you can create segmentation based on those criteria. So Sean, if you have any insight into what you've seen in the macro seg market and how that's evolved, would definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, you touched on a couple of things, right? I think both traditional, and I think what we've seen is traditional, and I would argue what we're seeing is sort of the modern macro segmentation. I think those two are becoming a lot closer together, right? So we're seeing things like NAC solutions tying into helping to determine what VLANs people go to, or network overlays that tie into that, right? And but there's still a lot of sort of network complexity that comes with that. There's still a lot of limitations, but it is a lot better than what we've had with simply just firewalls or something like that, right? It's still good for your larger swaths of security need, or separating users from assets, right? Like that type of thing. But it doesn't go far enough when it comes to that next level, right, of separating traffic within a segment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to pose this question to the audience. I think it's a given that all of our customers, to some degree, are using the traditional method, right? I guess I'm curious how many of our customers have implemented or are using some form of macro segmentation, via the kind of the definition we've illustrated here. You can post that in chat. I think that would be interesting to see where some of our customers are in the journey. You could argue that the next evolution of segmentation has been microsegmentation, which is mostly an agent-based segmentation, right? So it more or less requires a client to be installed on machines, and then you gather certain flow data on what that client is sending or receiving, and then you could also create rules and policies to allow or disallow those flows from that endpoint point of view, right? So this could apply to various parts of the environment. I think microsegmentation has traditionally been more applied to the data center, so server to server type of traffic, right? But it certainly could apply to client traffic as well, right? So I would define microsegmentation for users as what has been termed SASE or SSE, right? But within the data center, microsegmentation is obviously another layer to add on. And luckily, we have Sumi and Chris from Illumio to speak about kind of where they've seen the evolution of microsegmentation in their space. So Sumi and Chris, I'll turn the mic over to you, and please let us know what you think on the microseg piece.
Thank you, Francis. There's a conversation we were having the other day, right? So I come from the network days. Switches, routers, firewalls is what we configured to segment, and we still do, like you said, right? It's on the network layer. We can get VLANs, zones, subnets. It's great to create few hundreds of segments, but if we are creating thousands of segments, it really is not the layer we should look at or focus at, right? And then maybe 10 years ago, the focus went to SDN layer. There we can tunnel the fabric. We get a lot more segments. We can create 10,000 VXLANs. It's a centralized story, but to centrally manage 10,000 VXLANs and then manage policy on it is extremely hard. We all went through that journey. And then I worked on the hypervisor layer. We are still talking networking concepts, right? We're abstracting it. We're virtualizing everything into networks. So we have virtual firewalls, virtual routers, virtual networks. Great story, but at scale, it gets complicated, especially in hybrid environments, because the lateral movement threat is not just in our data centers. And even in our data centers, we have bare metal, we have legacy servers, right? We have different kinds of virtualized environments. And then we kind of came back to the host-based segmentation, right? Been configuring GPUs for a long time on the host itself. But on the host, to redefine or just set expectation of a segment, right? When we say a segment in a microsegmentation role, it is segmenting to the workload level, right? So each workload is its own segment, irrespective of the underlying fabric, irrespective of the virtualization stack, irrespective of if it's in a data center or a cloud, irrespective of the network fabric that's connecting it. And that's how the microsegmentation evolved and is being adopted. What I see is usually microsegmentation, the definition itself implies it is fast and easier to deploy, and it can be deployed at scale. Because the end goal usually is if ransomware or some kind of a threat enters one server, that is the first and the last server, we are really restricting the lateral movement. And obviously, we'll allow connections by policy, security policy. And if it does happen, we need a way to quarantine it in a very fast way. Chris?
Yeah, I just want to sort of echo what Sumi was saying, really. In terms of macro segmentation and the concepts that have just been discussed, a software-defined layer or a modern macro approach, there is a high taxonomy and performance penalty by routing a lot of our traffic through this software-defined layer. When we look at the concept of micro segmentation, we need an agnostic approach that can overlay already in existing network architectures, regardless of architecture or vendor selection. So that's going to be really important in terms of understanding the approach towards micro segmentation. Something I think that we often see when speaking to customers is perhaps a misconception in the fact that micro segmentation can be complex to achieve. Well, if you are anchoring your segmentation approach to your network controls and not actually to the workload itself, then you are inevitably going to have high taxonomy and performance penalty and operational inefficiency. So therefore, we need to anchor our segmentation policy to our workloads and to the host itself, because after all, in protecting our environments, the threat actors and the adversaries are targeting the data, which is the workload itself.
And like you said, there are definitely pros and cons to agent-based approaches on the host. Agents, the word itself is a big deal, right? Agents can be heavy, agents can impact performance, agents can bring down a server. So it's also important to see how the agent is architected. And there are some very lightweight agents there that are in user space that do not affect performance, but there are pros and cons to the approach.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
what we also need to consider is a concept of perhaps looking at a new approach where we decouple security from the network, and as I mentioned before, anchor it to the actual workload and the target itself as well. And that's where having an agnostic approach and to create these protect surfaces, these micro segments is really key.
Yep, absolutely. So I think ultimately a lot of our more mature customers are using a combination of these, right? A lot of them are using all three. I would say overall the market is turning more toward microsegmentation and reducing complexity on the network and on the firewalls too, to make it more scalable and easier to operate, right? So this kind of illustrates some of what fits into each of these categories, right? This one's a little top down from the other version, but the traditional would be the network fabric, right? Switches, routers, firewalls, stuff that we've all used for a while now. You could argue that a lot of the SDN functionality is what's been providing some of the macro segmentation, right? There's obviously different flavors on that front. From my perspective, EVOTEK's perspective, I think there's been a lot of challenges on how to operationalize SDN. A lot of my customers have a handful of guys or fewer, right, on their team that understand how to operate SDN. But if there's an issue with SDN, basically everything needs to get escalated, right? So similar to firewalls, usually SDN gets blamed first. So that creates a bottleneck operationally, right? So as you move up the stack, now things start to move down to the host or endpoint level, right? whether it's on the hypervisor or on the the client or user itself, right? So I think as you go higher, it gets more micro, so to speak. But I thought this was a good illustration of what a lot of people's environments looks like today, right? I'll just call it the battlefield, right? So the question I get asked very frequently, I know Sean as well, and probably Sumi and Chris, is where does this all fit into my environment, right? So the WAN is the WAN. Everyone knows the WAN, right? Still need firewalls there, so that hasn't changed much. So where does macro and micro fit in? Macro, as mentioned previously, is for the most part a network-based solution, right? So you're going to place that within the routers and switches and create policies via generally controller or via configuration to segment traffic and allow and disallow, right? To Sumi's point earlier, this has proven not to be very scalable, right? It is generally very expensive. You need to get licensing on those network devices for that functionality. And then operating and managing it is also very, very challenging, right? So education, enablement, knowledge transfer for your engineers to understand how to operationalize it has been a big challenge, right? So I think for that reason, the market has started to move toward microseg amongst some other benefits, right? So as mentioned before, microseg is agent-based. So now you're looking at it from the endpoint's perspective. And where I see my customers going is, to Chris's point, going back to simplifying the network of just switching and routing packets, right? Let network does what it does best and start to move those security controls more to the edge. So I'll just pose this question to Sumi and Chris. Your customers that are moved more toward microsegmentation, what is their strategy being if they have microseg already in place? Does it replace some of it, all of it? Like, what does that look like?
So most of the organizations we talk to, they have traditional segmentation in place, right? And they do look at either macro or micro as enhancing these defenses, enhancing the traditional perimeter security. With micro, they get a far more granular level into the interior of networks and data centers and cloud environments. So it's like instead of a single firewall protecting hundreds of applications, security is applied at each asset individually. That's what they want to get to, right? And the journey is sometimes it's a blend of different technologies. It's the tolerance they have on how much of network gear they want to use or not use. But with microsegmentation, you don't have to change any of the network architecture. And if it is an agent-based host solution, it is an easy entry. And again, there are different use cases, right? Macro segmentation has specific use cases which microsegmentation cannot solve. If you're talking about denial of service, that's not something we want to address at the host. It's too late if you're addressing it host. There is traffic engineering if I want to deal with voice data separate from email traffic. If I'm trying to do routing, if I'm doing ARP spoofing, these are the things where we want to do on the network segments. At the same time, microsegmentation addresses challenges of lateral movement threats, IoT hijacking. When we talk about container segmentation, we're opening doors to another world, right? Microsegmentation is a way to go to address a lot of these challenges of ransomware attacks.
Yeah, just to add to what Sumi was saying, I think the previous slide perfectly illustrates this sort of layered approach on different use cases across a customer's infrastructure. At the bottom, you've got that network layer, and we want to make sure the network does what it does, provides fast availability, and then of course scalability as well when we talk about modern applications on demand in customer environments. Where actually when we overlay micro-segmentation into these environments as well, we're creating these protect surfaces and minimizing lateral movement if we do find adversaries beyond those perimeters. I think macro, as you mentioned at the beginning, versus micro is the wrong interpretation. There's always going to be those use cases for macro segmentation. At the micro level, the performance penalty to do inspection and to do DDoS protection, as Sumi said, is not something you would want to operationalize. What you want to do is enforce principle of least privilege, making sure that the network has availability to these applications, but then ensuring that those communications are available and enforced to validate explicit trust for availability of that application itself as well. So they're very much complementary to one another. And that's what we see with a lot of our customers as well, where we'll see this architecture. And just again, to overlay a good micro-segmentation approach, or when looking to evaluate how to approach micro-segmentation, a solution should overlay into already existing architectures without any operational disruption.
Yep, all good points. So I kind of want to delve into specific parts of the environment, right? Because they're all very, very different. This is just one example, right? Everyone's probably looks very, very different, but they all have a lot of things in common, right? So we'll just start at the simplest level, right? So campus branch, right? Some of our customers do have on-prem compute and storage, right, via some sort of robo type of solution. And some of our customers home everything back to the data center, right? So in the simplest case, when there's no local hosting of applications, microseg outside of SSE is not really in place. So you would need to still rely on combination of macroseg and firewalling too, more or less, right? As you increase in complexity, moving to a data center, what we see is that all three are usually in play, right? Firewalls are still necessary on the WAN for INET, DIA, et cetera, right? For those circuits. Some sort of north-south control. I mean, you're still going to need IDS, IPS, URL filtering, things of that nature, right? That's what a firewall does best. So just leave it there, right? Macroseg in the data center starts to create some multi-tenancy or some controls as far as what can talk to what, right? But they're very, very broad strokes, right? Sometimes they're subnet kind of tied to subnets, which is challenging, right? Because things move around, subnets change. So then you have to go back, change all those policies if they're tied to subnets, right? There's other SDN technologies like we mentioned previously that you can utilize to kind of move away from IPs more from a security control method. But at that point, now you have another layer of complexity as well, right? And then a lot of them do not provide east-west type of controls as well, like Sumi mentioned. So I think that's kind of the low-hanging fruit for microseg, is that lateral east-west movement, seeing what's going on there, and then applying some sort of controls. Ironically, a lot of our customers that have moved toward macroseg via SDN data centers have started to use microseg to identify those flows, right? Because that's what you need, that data to create policies. And a lot of our less mature customers have no understanding of what those application dependencies and flows are. So from a basic level, microseg is used just to map that. But obviously, it makes sense to move down some of those security policies to the endpoint as well. And Sean, I'm gonna call on you here. Yeah. What have you seen on our customers as far as kind of the balance between macroseg and microseg in data centers from your experience?
I mean, I think the one's been a lot
overall, or a combination.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely see people at like every point in the journey, right? There's people that haven't really done. There's organizations that really haven't done a lot, right? It could be traditional firewalling, and that's it, right? And I think a lot of them are going down this journey of, you know, whether it's a .1x type technology or whatever, right? Like moving more into macroseg. You know, microseg, I think we see a lot of interest if an organization hasn't done it, and like protecting the crown jewels, so to speak, right? Like starting with that and some of those, you know, the key applications. You know, the customers or organizations that are cloud heavy, I think, is really interesting for, you know, host-based microseg, because there's a lot of sort of, you know, maybe lack of understanding sometimes in the cloud networking and those pieces, right? And having something that's host-based when you have a network that's sort of rented from whatever provider, right, is maybe an extra layer that, you know, of security that brings some peace of mind. It's, hey, I understand how this works. It works the same in my cloud servers as it does in my on-prem servers versus, a network that's completely foreign to me, right? So we see some people that are struggling sort of with that approach and how to, and if we're, across multiple clouds, right? It's something in AWS and Azure and, GCP or something, or Oracle, like, having that ability to manage all those in the same way without the sort of underlying nuances of that cloud sort of networking technology choices, I think is something that makes for an interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think our customers that are more early to mid in their cloud journey have sometimes tried to make their cloud like their on-prem data center. And obviously cloud networking is completely different, right? So it's a round peg, square hole type of situation. I think in the public cloud, the reliance on microsig is evident, right? For that reason. Sumi and Chris, if you want to speak briefly on like how you've seen microsig and Illumio fit into the private cloud versus public cloud, that'd be great.
Sure. So you are right? The first early adopters, they were looking at the data center, but now it's hybrid environments. They're considering private clouds and public clouds. I've seen many organizations commit to a specific vendor for the technologies, whether it being a network automation, SDN technology, and going the same route for SDN. And I've seen a few successful projects, but when the scale gets higher, and also the need to kind of migrate workloads across these environments, right? Simple concept of line migration, if you move it to the cloud, the microsig concept falls apart if you don't choose the right technology. So I'm seeing growing number of organizations who are flexible and seeing microsegmentation as an overlay on top of even the SDN technologies, like Chris was saying earlier. That's a trend I've been seeing. And that's one aspect of when you're considering the micro or macro, right? That being agnostic to the underlying cloud or even the deployment is very important. And it's a huge risk and increase in adoption on the cloud side, because now it's not just adoption of cloud. The developers are using cloud. We're seeing more and more of container clusters being spun up. The last thing they want to do is come to a security person and ask for permission. They're spinning those up, and they don't want to come to security. Security shouldn't be the bottleneck. So this whole shift left approach, even microsegmentation technologies and the vendors are going into that space on how do we make sure security fits into their infrastructure as a code, CI/CD pipelines. So the huge shift in that space for the cloud. And I'm seeing some stats on the cyber threats. They're mostly targeted to the cloud environments now. So it's no longer just a data center resiliency conversation when we're talking microsegmentation. Chris?
Yeah, just to echo that, there's a concept in psychology called prevalence-induced concept creep, which essentially means problem creep. What the same challenges that we see within our data centers also apply to what we see in the cloud, the risk of lateral movement or understanding or lack of visibility within communications between our different cloud providers. And it's probably fair to say that most customers we work with have presence both in multiple clouds and within our data centers as well. And to Sumi's point, there's another concept called death from above, where certain compromises that occur within the cloud can actually traverse down into our on-premises data centers and vice versa to another cloud. So when it comes to microsegmentation, Sumi made a great point about choosing your vendor or choosing your approach wisely so that it doesn't fall apart when you start to address other areas of your business as well. So looking at it from a holistic approach when evaluating that technology is really important, even if you're just starting in a particular place, right? We see a lot of customers that will be, as to Sean's point, starting at a particular crown jewel or looking to ring fence and particularly isolate a critical application, but then looking to scale that out across other areas of their business as well. So I think it's really important at that beginning stage when you're looking to evaluate and look what success looks like further down the road, that where else are you going to be looking to protect, and how does that privilege-induced concept creep have an effect on your decision making when it comes to micro segmentation?
Yeah, great. Thanks for that input. I think we're pretty much at time. I was hoping to get to some industry specific strategies, but we'll just take that as a follow-up. So I guess action item to our customers, because I love to give our customers action items, is to reach out to your rep to kind of further tailor this discussion to where you are, right, in your journey, and also possibly to your specific industry. And thanks to Sean, Sumi, and Chris for helping to present high level what different segmentation strategies are out there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thank you, Francis.
Yep. Bye.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sumi.
everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.